Well, good Wednesday evening, everyone. I am not Scotty Powell, but I'm Ricky Matthews here with the Carolina Weather Group. Today is March 11th, 2015. It's been an interesting day across North Carolina. We've had a few areas of rain and even some thunderstorms in eastern North Carolina that rolled through, some damage reports. But tonight we're going to talk about a totally different topic, and that's winter weather. Throwing back many, many years to 1993. I wasn't even born yet, but that's a different topic.
Great.
So,
Thanks for pointing that out.
But we've got a great lineup of panelists, but we'll start off with introducing our regular panelists, and I'll toss it to Joey to tell everyone a little bit about what's been going on in his neck of the woods today.
There has been nothing going on. I watched it drizzle. But, yeah, seriously, it really didn't even really rain hard up here today, so it was interesting. But, yeah, like I said, not a lot going on. In case you're a first-time viewer or something, my name's Joey. I run Catawba County Weather. Find me on Facebook. Twitter handle's right there. It's not hard. It's my name. I think you can find it. So I guess what I'll do is I'm gonna throw it down to the future.
Good Wednesday
Austin.
evening, everyone. I am not Scotty Powell, but
Austin, why don't you tell everybody who you are?
Alright, I'm Austin. I'm 15 years old. They call me the future. Hopefully I'm the future. I was invited on the show in April of last year, and ever since then they've invited me back home. We got to about 84 degrees today, and like Joey, we watched it drizzle. Watched the thunderstorms pass to the north and to the south. So
I'll take it from here.
That's about it. Yeah, Daniel. This is actually Daniel's subject. He was the one that really wanted to do this show. So, Daniel, have the
Okay,
floor.
thank you. If Austin's the future and our other guys are not the future, I'm the present. Anyway, guys, I appreciate being on. For those who are watching and hadn't seen before, my name's Daniel Crawley. I'm located in McDowell County, North Carolina. I help work with the McDowell Weather page on Facebook. And a lot like what Joey had in the Catawba County area, we had just a little bit of light rain and drizzle, maybe a tenth of an inch of rain, and had temperatures up to the 60s today. Looks like we'll get some more rain coming up as we head into the weekend. And another cool air wedge event on Friday. Might stay in the 40s on Friday. So nothing's changed as far as that's concerned. We've had a lot of cool air wedge events this year, and looks like that is going to continue into the early spring. And I'll throw it back to Ricky, and he kind of go with what's going on.
all right, sure. Yeah, you mentioned the wedge event, and then kind of ties a little bit into winter weather, and as Daniel kind of alluded to, that's our main topic tonight, recapping the blizzard of '93. And Daniel, I want you to introduce us a little bit because it is your topic. So talk a little bit about, your memories of the blizzard of '93, and then we'll introduce our panelists.
Well, Ricky, I was 13 years old at the time it happened, and other than probably Hurricane Hugo in 1989, that has really been the meteorological event as defined my lifetime. Affected my particular area in a great way, and all of, really, if you think about all the eastern U.S., population-wise, it affected nearly half of the population of the continental United States. But, that storm happened in March of 1993. That whole 92-93 winter had been fairly quiet, but we definitely made up for that on that weekend in March. We had a very strong area of low pressure that formed down in the Gulf of Mexico. And, normally when we have storm systems develop in the Gulf, they're not as strong as the storm we had in March of '93. If you look at a pressure standpoint and the winds and the effects, really this storm was a off-season version of a tropical system because you had the storm surge in the Gulf Coast states, you had high winds and heavy rains in the Florida area and then up the coastline, and then as you got inland, it just turned into a raging blizzard from areas of Mississippi and Alabama across Georgia and then up into the Appalachians, and it was quite phenomenal, and to this day it's the benchmark for our part of the country as far as severe winter storms.
I want to give Scotty just a brief moment here to introduce himself, and then we'll turn it over to our panelist. Scotty had a little difficulty in joining, but Scotty's down in eastern North Carolina where some of the storms were earlier today, right?
Yeah, that's right, Ricky. So first of all, my AT&T bill is going to be expensive because I had to use my iPhone as a hotspot, but we're connected now, so we're good to go. Yeah, down here at Carolina Beach, beautiful day with temperatures in the mid-70s. Also, two cool things. I'm sure Rob may have seen this as well. Had some sea fog just off the coast, and here on the coast it was sunny, but I don't know, maybe a couple miles out, just completely foggy. So that was pretty cool to see. And then this afternoon, watching some of those thunderstorms develop just to our north over the Greenville area. I know they got some damage from those severe thunderstorms. So got to see those building off in the distance. But here in Carolina Beach, just a warm afternoon and warm evening, actually. The wind's gusty. But besides that, got to see a cool rainbow yesterday out over the ocean as well. So get some good weather here, but I think it's getting ready to change for tomorrow. So enjoyed it while I could.
Yeah, you're the envy of all of us down there on the coast.
I'm telling you, after the winter we've had of several days below 30 degrees, the 75-degree weather today with the ocean and all that, it felt good. So back to reality tomorrow, though, with the cold air coming in. So
yeah. Speaking of cold air, we'll dive straight into this topic then and introduce our panel members. I'm going to start off left from right on my screen. The first one's going to be Brian Peters, who was in Alabama during the whole shouldn't say outbreak, blizzard of '93. So, Brian, what's your first memory when that name of the storm just comes to your head?
Oh gosh, honest to goodness truth is that there are so many memories about that storm. The first memory that comes to mind is I was the deputy MIC at the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Birmingham, and I had several forecasters who told me after the fact that they wished that they had issued blizzard warnings because that was probably the closest we were ever going to get to a blizzard in the state of Alabama. Blizzard doesn't really have to do with snowfall amounts. It has to do more with the intensity and with wind speeds, and we did not actually achieve true wind speeds that were required for a blizzard warning. But I understood where they were coming from because we ended up with snow covering every square inch of the state of Alabama, and you don't see that happen. Well, we've never seen that happen outside of the Superstorm of '93. I kind of hate the term superstorm, though, because it sounds like it can never be beat, and we all know that it will be beat sometime in the future.
Weather's a repeating factor, and the snow aspect of the storm repeated itself as the system moved east. Eric Thomas was in the Charlotte area at the time, correct, Eric?
Yeah, that's right. When you talk about memories, I got to tell you that it's funny. What are we, like 22 years ago, I guess now, right? And it's interesting because when you talk about the memories of the storm, I have memories, obviously personal memories, from what actually came through Charlotte, and then I also have recollections of what I remember seeing, on the larger synoptic weather charts. And again, you're talking about a mid-latitude storm with a central pressure that's as deep as a Category 2 hurricane coming across the northern Gulf. I still remember vividly the squall line that was going across the Florida peninsula. And I can't remember if we had lightning detection or not at that point, but with or without it, it was just such a sharp line, squall line that was cutting across Florida. I think there was a tornado watch down there, and I just remember thinking, goodness gracious, those people are just getting absolutely hammered. And yet at the same time, we had the blizzard warnings out here for the North Carolina high country. I guess I'll just start off with one of my strangest memories that I'll probably tell you all evening. But I remember that the Charlotte airport, we only picked up like a couple of inches of snow officially at the airport. It was crazy. And I only lived about 8 miles as the crow flies to the northwest of Center City, Charlotte. That's where my home was. And by the time I got from Center City, Charlotte, just 8 miles to the northwest, the snowfall accumulations had changed from about maybe 2 inches to about a foot. Just by the time I got to my house up there in the northwestern part of Mecklenburg County. and I remember it was a really, really long day, and I remember it was, I'm sure, way, way after midnight. But I just had been promoted to chief meteorologist too, by the way. I started as the weeknight meteorologist in January of 1993, and here we were in March, and I was like, wow, what have I got myself into? And but when I got home, it was probably 1 or 2 in the morning. My neighbors were still out building snowmen and stuff, and I really wasn't in a very good humor at that point. Somebody threw a snowball at me, and I remember kind of snapping at one of my neighbors. And I thought, what the heck is my problem, you know? And but it was funny because everybody was out just enjoying this amazing event, and I was just looking for a bed at that point. But again, some of those snow totals in the North Carolina mountains were just beyond comprehension. I mean, 50, 60-inch snow actual totals, not drifts. And I know the drifts were just ridiculous. People couldn't get out of their mountain cabins, caught off guard up there and things like that. I think we had helicopter rescues going on. So it was just an unbelievable storm. As I think it was Brian who just said that every storm is eventually going to get eclipsed sooner or later, but I got to wonder if that's going to happen in my lifetime. I mean, just what an amazing variety of weather this thing produced from the Gulf Coast all the way up through New England. Just incredible.
And you mentioned the heavy snow totals. One gentleman who was in the midst of the heavy snow totals at the time was Gary Stephenson. Gary, you were in Asheville at the time where some of the heaviest snow totals fell.
Yeah, up to that point, living in Harnett County all my life, I think the most snow I'd ever seen is about 10 inches. And like Eric said, there's so many memories that come to light when you think of that storm. Number one, the Euro model picking up on it a week in advance, and we're all going, yeah, right. Middle of March, we're going to have this massive snowstorm at the East Coast. Yeah, and then it keeps showing up and it keeps showing up. But Asheville, the Asheville area kind of got lulled into a false sense of security because we actually had a little bit of snow early that Friday morning. And I remember going somewhere that afternoon and people going, that wasn't as bad as everybody said it was going to be. And we're like, no, the big thing's coming tonight. And it started snowing about 7 o'clock that evening. And for what the storm became with the wind later on, the atmosphere was literally dead calm. I mean, there were branches on trees at my house that were about the diameter of a toothpick. And the snow stacked up 4, 5, 6 inches straight up on those limbs. I'd never seen anything like it. And we ended up with snowfall rates averaging anywhere from an hour during that first 10 hours. We had a foot on the ground by 5 a.m., and then a few hours later is when the wind kicked in. And I'll show some pictures that I've got loaded later in the broadcast. But my house was north of Asheville. We had a solid 2 feet of snow that I can guesstimate, but we had drifts of 4 to 5 feet in my front yard. It was just, again, mind-boggling. And it's like Eric said, this may be the superstorm of our lifetimes. There may be one that gets eclipsed, that eclipses it down the road. But personally, I hope that's the worst one I ever see in my lifetime.
And then finally, as we go further east, Rob Fowler was in the Charleston area when this storm hit. Rob, talk a little bit about your memories and how Charleston fared.
Well, I kind of feel outside because I really didn't have what the other guys are talking about here in Charleston, but I think my memories and our memories are just complete disbelief of the dramatic change that we saw from mid-60s early in the day to freezing and snow by the end of the day. And wind gusts 70, 80 miles an hour. We did get a little bit of snow, not much here, but I'd say about an hour and a half drive from Charleston, you had 2 feet of snow. So, and I agree with Eric, watching the squall line come across Florida, seeing everything deepen, all of a sudden low pressures, records were being set in places like Columbia and Charlotte, and realizing that we had just come off Hurricane Hugo 4 years before, and here we go again with for lack of a better term, the superstorm following up with Hurricane Hugo. So it was for us not as intense as our guys to the north, but it was something that we had to deal with not just physically but emotionally, because this was the first big storm of any size that had come post-Hugo.
It was certainly a storm that impacted a large swath of the East Coast. Eric, I want to toss it to you to talk a little bit about how this storm got started from the synoptic standpoint, because you mentioned looking at the synoptic charts and awe and watching it deepen out and everything, or bomb out. Talk a little bit about it from that aspect, and your memories of how it showed up from a meteorological standpoint.
Well, it's interesting because this is the time of the year where you expect these kind of storms, but what made this one so unique, and again, my memory is really foggy on it, but I do remember that there was a subtropical jet that was over the Gulf at that time. We had a split flow, and so you had this storm that was developing along the subtropical jet. I think there was an old frontal boundary down there, and so you had a bit of a baroclinic zone, and so you had this area of low pressure that's starting to deepen, and it seemed to me like that it was picked up by a shortwave. And then that strengthened it even more. I can't really remember. I mean, I can't imagine the Gulf waters were helping it that much at this point. I mean, it's early in the season. I don't remember anything about the sea surface temperatures. I don't know if it was getting any help at all. Somebody else on the panel may know from the actual Gulf. But nonetheless, you had a strong subtropical jet. This thing's moving along the Gulf. There's no friction, so there's nothing really to try to slow it down. And then as this thing started to turn a little bit north, the northern branch of the jet stream, and there was another shortwave that was coming in that also picked it up, and that was sort of the double whammy as this thing really got going. So it was one of those perfect storms where it had both good dynamics from the subtropical jet and then handed it off to the northern branch. At the same time, you had Arctic air coming into the middle of the country, so you had this incredible temperature contrast that had set up across the southeastern U.S., so it had all that to work with as well. So you had both the thermodynamics and also the mechanics, if you will, the mechanical dynamics in the atmosphere. They all came together, and boom, off it went. Of course, then it took advantage of the baroclinic zone that you typically have on the eastern seaboard, and so then it became the super nor'easter, if you will. Here's what I don't remember. I really don't remember. I don't remember how well we forecasted it, to be honest about it. I seem to remember that the models handled it pretty well, but whether or not we bought into it and how early we bought into it, I just don't remember. I wish I did. But as I think it was either Gary or Brian were saying, maybe it was Rob, that the models were picking up on it. I mean, this was a point at which the models were starting to get pretty good. Nowhere near as good as they are today, but I do remember that the models had picked up on it pretty early, but I cannot for the life of me remember when we, really hitched our wagon to the models, or if we kind of dragged our feet for a while. I wish I could remember, but outside of that's my recollection of the synoptics.
Yeah, I can address that from the Alabama point of view anyway, because the forecast that we issued on Monday before the snowstorm Friday evening and Saturday morning, the forecast, that was back in the day when we had the forecast and then the extended forecast. So the extended forecast was 4 to 7 days out. Well, no, I'm sorry, pardon me, 3 to 5 days out. That was the extended forecast at that time. And I remember Monday afternoon at the 4 o'clock release, the forecasters were talking about putting snow in the forecast. Now, of course, we didn't put a blizzard, we didn't put heavy snow, we didn't put a record snow, but we did put snow in the forecast for, and I think it was in the Friday-Saturday time frame. And I heard one of the panel members mention a memory about having an event, and we had in the central Alabama. The snow actually came, Friday evening into Saturday morning, but we had a snow shower or a couple of snow showers that actually occurred during the morning and very early afternoon. And I remember at the office, at the National Weather Service office, the phones just absolutely lit up because everybody was saying, "Well, is that it? Have you guys blown it again?" That kind of comment. Because we had these little snow showers, and they were just these little snow bursts. They didn't cover the ground, nothing that dramatic, But, everybody saw flakes falling, and, of course, in the southeastern U.S. and especially in central Alabama, any snowflakes are falling. That's big news. And, of course, we were trying to tell people, no, this is not – wait, the big event is coming yet. None of us realizing that we were going to get, that kind of record event. And it was an absolute record for Birmingham. The official record at that point had been 11 inches of snow, and we eclipsed that with 13 inches, and most of the area actually had more than what the airport reported.
Wow. So, Brian, when you got inside the extended forecast and you were down to the 24 to 48 hour range, how did that go in terms of your forecast versus verification?
Well, it was one of those situations, Eric, where the forecast started out with 1 to 3, and then went 2 to 4.
Well, that's
and then went 4 to 7.
Yeah.
And then more than 5.
Yeah.
So, as the snow kept piling up. We were very fortunate, though, because it was, as you said, a fairly well modeled storm. The NGM was doing a pretty good job with that storm. And, of course, none of us were believing it was going to bomb out to the extent that the models were trying to hint at. But we certainly bought into it, at least on Monday, by putting snow in the forecast for Friday and Saturday. Back in those days, we didn't put amounts in that far out, so it wasn't until we got to Thursday that we began to talk about amounts. And like I said, our initial forecasts were small, 1 to 3. We had been using a technique, and I don't know if any of you have ever heard of this before. It's called the magic chart. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of that. And I can't remember the details of it, but it involves using the 700 millibar vertical velocities, and I'm trying to remember where the moisture came from, but you overlaid the 700 millibar vertical velocities with some moisture, I think at 850 maybe, and from that you could get a relative idea of how much snow was going to fall. And I remember one of the lead forecasters coming to me. Like I said, I was the deputy in charge there. And he came to me and he said, "Do you realize the magic chart is forecasting 10 to 12 inches of snow across central Alabama?" And it's like, yeah, right, on Thursday, we're not going to say anything about 10 to 12 inches of snow. I mean, especially since we'd already looked up the record, and the record was 11. And, meteorologists, we know better than to forecast a record event because, hitting those record events is pretty hard to do. It's kind of like a moving target.
Especially in March.
Yeah, especially in March. Yeah. So we knew that the record was 11, and of course, not in our wildest dreams did we have any idea, but that we were going to get that kind of event. But fortunately, the evening crew that came on at 4 o'clock, and we operated 4 to midnight, midnight to 8, 8 to 4. The evening crew that came on at 4. They came prepared to the office to be able to stay a little bit longer, not knowing they were going to stay for 2.5 days, almost 3 days. But the midnight crew actually came in about 3 hours early, and that worked out actually pretty well because by Saturday morning, the area here in central Alabama was completely paralyzed. And you asked about memories, and one of my memories was that all of the people pitching in, people were having problems because people did not prepare for this kind of extended event, and so there were people that needed insulin. There were nurses that were trying to get to patients that they got to, and I know I had a 4-wheel drive vehicle, and I helped actually a nurse get to a patient who needed insulin, and in my area, and plus I actually drove the 20 miles from where I lived to the office because they ran out of food Saturday morning. And I remember calling in and asking how everything was going at the office, knowing that they were not going to get home on this Saturday for sure, and maybe not even on Sunday. And I could tell in the forecaster's voice that there was something wrong. And I said, "Okay, come on, Bob, give it to me straight." And he said, "Well, the problem is," and this was about 11 o'clock in the morning on Saturday morning, he said, "the problem is we've eaten the last crumb of food. There's no more food in the whole building." They'd raided all the vending machines that were there, and there was nothing immediately around the office that they could get to. So, like I said, I had a 4-wheel drive vehicle, so I went down in my little town and went down to a little convenience store that was open. And they had a generator running. Are you ready for this? They had a generator running, the refrigerators, a gas pump, and the cash register. They were really on top of things. So I bought about $40 worth of various and sundry sandwiches and whatever, and the normal 22-minute drive to the office took me 2.5 hours.
Wow.
And I almost didn't make it getting there. And it was all because, every single highway was blocked with vehicles. The interstate was totally impassable due to jackknifed tractor-trailer rigs. And then most of the surface roads, like I said, I had four-wheel drive, and in snow you can move around. You can't stop very well, but you can at least move around. But I made steady progress and actually picked up a police officer on the way into the office. And I thought for a minute there I wasn't even going to make it to the office. I got to the office and there were 5 and 6 foot snow drifts blocking the entrance to the parking lot where the office was located. And I just backed the car up and kind of put it in gear and revved the engine and hit that snow drift. And at that point, I was kind of worried because the car lifted on the front end, and I thought, uh-oh, I'm going to lose traction. And for a minute, it kind of held. It's like, what's happening? And then, boom, we shot through the snow drift, and I got to the office. And like I said, they were very happy to see me because they were out of food. So,
the true definition of a crisis.
That made it a crisis.
I just want to make a note that we're almost 30 minutes into this, and nobody has mentioned the word bombogenesis yet.
And we won't be. That's more enough for what Brian was saying about his trip from the convenience store to back to the Weather Service office. That was one of the spookiest things, my drive from Weaverville, which is about 5 miles north of Asheville. Any of you who are familiar with Asheville, there's Merriman Avenue, which actually comes in kind of like parallel 1923 into Asheville. But driving in that morning at 6 a.m., there was about a foot of snow on the ground. I passed 2 vehicles in that 5-mile journey. One was an ambulance. The other was another 4x4. And there were cars spun out everywhere. There was no one on the streets. All the power was out. And if you're a fan of Walking Dead, that's what I would attest it to. I mean, that's what it looked like. I mean, it looked like there was no one alive, that someone had dropped me on Hoth. And, I mean, it was just, and really, that's actually a scary thing because I had to actually think of where I needed to turn because the terrain looked so different with a foot and a half of snow on it. And it was really chilling to be driving past all these vehicles that had been abandoned. And this storm had just gotten started. This was 7 o'clock on Saturday morning. The wind had not picked up yet. Now, when the wind picked up, that's when all hell broke loose in Asheville. But, that right there is one of the most vivid memories I think that I'll ever carry away, is that it really looked like an episode when every Asheville had just been swept away, and I was the only one left plowing through all that mess, trying to get to work. And I'll also say what Brian said. Once you go to about 2 feet of snow, 4x4s don't do you any good because all you do is wrap it up under them, you lift off. Hey, we had National Guard Humvees that were getting stuck up there. So, once you go past 2 feet of snow, nobody going nowhere.
Yeah. That was my next question, and you introduced it. How was the state response to the storm? Was North Carolina Emergency Management, North Carolina National Guard prepared, and same for Alabama, Brian? Since you probably work more closely with the federal government from the Weather Service standpoint.
Well, we worked closely with the state EMA, and I don't think anybody was truly prepared for the magnitude of the event we ended up with. I mean, because honestly, the forecasts were good, but we were underestimating the snowfall as even as late as Friday morning. I mean, we were not looking at the possibility of getting a foot of snow in central Alabama. Like I said, with a record of 11 inches, it's almost one of those things where even if you absolutely positively knew you were going to get that much, would you tell people that or not? Because, people would likely panic or whatever. But the thing was that a lot of central Alabama, of course, we don't have snowplows around this area that much. There are a few, but there's very, very few. Graders got pulled into use. The big problem was all the jackknife tractor trailer rigs on the interstate. That was because the interstates, and I don't know if you all are familiar with central Alabama, but we're a lot hillier than most people realize. And so the interstates really shut down early on. It was not nearly as big a humanitarian crisis as we had last year when the ice occurred, but actually kept people on the interstates for as much as 24 to 30 hours. People managed to get home, but because it was snow, because it also came overnight. So when the snow started Friday evening, people pretty much had gotten where they wanted to go. The thing that shut down the interstates was that there's so much trucking on the interstates, and the trucks, of course, kept trying to go. And with the hills that we have around here, they could not navigate them with the snow, and ended up with there's one Offord Avenue is at the top of one Shades Crest hill there in Birmingham, where I-65 comes up from US 31, and there were something on the order of, and don't hold me to the number, but it's something like 24 different jackknife tractor trailer rigs that were on that one northbound side of I-65. So like I say, when I was trying to get to the office, I would normally have taken the interstate. The interstate was totally, you couldn't use the interstate at all. So I had to use surface streets to get where I wanted to go. And another problem we had that, of course, nobody really thought much about was the snow drifts. Like I said, I got to the office, and I had this 4 to 6 foot snow drift facing me, and I was trying to figure out how I'm going to get through it. And that's not a problem we have in central Alabama on a regular basis.
And just so we include Rob a little bit here, because I feel like we left him out. He's in South Carolina. He was like, outside the area of interest. But Rob, you mentioned an interesting point earlier about Hurricane Hugo and this storm, and kind of the connection people made with big storms, big events, big impacts. How did people in your area perceive it from the impacts you received, and also from the whole United States being hit by a big storm impact?
As you guys mentioned at the beginning, about half the United States population was impacted by this storm, and we had just come off Hugo. Those emotional scars are still pretty deep. You can still drive in this area today and see trees bent over or down from Hurricane Hugo. And Eric, you and I were on the panel before talking about that, and the scars, physical scars are still there 25, almost 26 years later. So to see this big storm coming, and I agree with Brian. I was watching it, but I had no idea it was going to turn out to be what it turned out to be a few days later. But what we had to endure is very, very strong winds. So you're looking at hurricane force winds for us. I think Myrtle Beach hit 90 miles an hour. We were pretty close to 70, 75 here. Not that far away. We did have blizzard conditions out towards Orangeburg and Clarendon County, which is about an hour and a half, 2-hour drive from us. But just for us to see snowflakes at the end of the day, when we started the day with temperatures in the mid-60s, I think was just a tremendous shock to everybody's system, and to see how quickly the weather can change, and how everybody can be impacted by such a big storm. So I'm enjoying the conversation. I'm listening and I'm learning, because we didn't have all of what you guys had, but we were kind of dealing with our own little situation down here because it had been so close to Hurricane Hugo. And I'm also, my interest peaked when I heard Walking Dead. So,
Gary and Eric, how long did it take the North Carolina region to recover from a storm like this?
Well, go ahead, Gary. Do you want to start?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, in Western North Carolina, Eric was mentioning airlifts. I mean, I remember standing in my yard watching a flight of helicopters heading to Boone to drop supplies, because they had 4 or 5 feet of snow up there with 6, 7 foot drifts. We were without power in our area because traffic couldn't get up I-7, or excuse me, I-40 there in oh good gracious, there's a big grade, and I cannot remember the name of it. See what happens when you are past meteorology.
Daniel's got you. Here it comes.
Fort Mountain.
Old Fort Mountain. Thank you, Daniel. There you go. Old Fort Mountain. But they could not get up Old Fort Mountain to get supplies up there, to get transformers up there, because 40 was just completely shut down. I remember schools were out for, of course, a solid week. I remember we still had that storm wrapped up, the snow wrapped up very early before sunrise Sunday morning. We still had a foot of snow on the ground the following Friday. The sad fact of the matter is, Eric pointed this out, and Brian pointed this out too. As bad as it was even the meteorologists didn't know how bad it was going to get. That's what ends up happening when you have record-breaking events. And people just did not have a clue that it was going to get as bad as it was, and they hadn't bought supplies, and they weren't ready, and all of a sudden there was 2 feet of snow on the ground, and there was that snow that was going to remain on the ground for a week. So they were pretty much stuck in place for a good 5 days after that storm, unless you had a good 4x4 vehicle.
Yeah, and I really don't have much to add. Gary was really right smack in the middle of all of this, and he actually had much more detail than I could have given you there. I remember the power outages. I remember the power outages were on par with the power outages from Hugo. In some cases, it took I think up to 3 weeks. Gary, is that what you were saying?
Yeah, the isolated areas. Yeah, because I mean, they were trying to go for the grids that would get the most people back online the quickest. But yeah, that was it. And the Monday morning after the storm, Asheville set a record low. I believe it was either 2 or 3 degrees above zero. Now, for the middle of March to set a record low that cold, now that was one that will never be broken in our lifetimes.
Birmingham did the same thing.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say is that that's the double whammy. It was one thing to lose power for 2 or 3 weeks with Hugo, which was September. We're in the south. Temperatures aren't extreme. But man, when you're without power and you're at freezing or below, or as you said, Gary, hanging around zero and no power, man, that is a desperate situation in a hurry up there.
Yeah, I'll kind of interject also. We had that situation, no power. And I'm looking, I keep a daily log of the weather, and I went back and pulled my daily data from 1993, March, and the next day our high was 44, the low was 28, and the following day, the 15th for us, 46 and 24. So we also had power outages, and nobody was heating. So it was for us down here, 20s at night is somewhat unusual, and I think the month of February taught us that we can survive because we had some pretty cold temperatures this past February.
It redefined cold for many areas across North Carolina, it seems.
That's true.
Gary, from a television standpoint, how was it covered? And Eric as well, since you were in the Charlotte area, how was the storm covered from a TV standpoint?
We're kind of in this situation that Brian also mentioned. Is like, you're seeing this. We were going for a foot of snow on Friday night. The thing is, we didn't know that the wind aspect was going to kick in until the following morning when this thing really started rocking and rolling, because we got the blizzard warning from the Weather Service about 4 a.m. I got to the station and we were off the air, and I looked at the assistant news director and I said, "You need to get me on TV. We can get it on TV." He's like, "What's up?" I said, "There's a blizzard warning in effect." And he's like, "Is that bad?" He was from Florida. Anyway, I said, "Yes, it's bad. I've lived in North Carolina all my life, and I've never heard of a blizzard warning in North Carolina." And we actually were doing top and bottom of the hour cut-ins that were lasting 10, 12 minutes through the day into the night. But we were running into the problem with everybody losing power. Nobody could hear what we were saying. We tried to do some simulcasting, I believe, on local radio stations, but we had people in the field, but then we reached a point when the blizzard peaked out that we could only send crews so far from the TV station, and I mean only a couple of miles from the station at most, because it was just too dangerous for them to go any farther than that, and they wouldn't have the capability of getting back. We also ran into the situation where LOS was at the time near the Grove Park Inn. There were 2 roads that went up to the station. Both of those roads got cut off by trees that came down. So our photographers actually had to go get chainsaws from people who lived in that neighborhood and cut the trees so they could get vehicles through. But as far as covering it, we could cover it weather-wise, saying this is what we're getting, this is what we're seeing on the radar. But when it came to actually getting into the field and reporting and showing people what was going on, there was a very small radius around the TV station that we could get to just for safety reasons, because again, it was an extremely dangerous situation. It scared the crap out of me.
You know, it's funny Gary mentioned that, because I lost power here in McDowell County late morning on Saturday. I was actually fortunate enough to keep it that long. We had lost cable on Friday night, and where I live in the county, I'm on the north side of a hill, and I have a problem getting any kind of, antenna, getting any signal. But I remember hearing, I can't remember exactly where I heard it, but some of the counties, like Transylvania County or Jackson County or something, they were reporting like 98% of people without power. Which is, it's not a lot of people per se.
30 inches of snow.
Yeah. So, all the hard work that Gary and everybody did at LOS, they really probably wasn't many people that were able to hear it other than the simulcast that you were doing on the radio.
Yeah, and it's funny because when we get on the air every once in a while and we tell people to make sure that they have their emergency storm supplies and their emergency storm kit, I can just feel the people out in the public giggling at me like, really, Eric? You really want me to go out and get an emergency storm kit? And I can understand the giggles to a point, because really these are very, very rare events. But boy, oh boy, when the Hugo comes and the March Superstorm comes, and you hear these stories that Gary was telling, I'll tell you, there's a lot of people I know that probably wish they had those kits at that point.
Yeah.
And the irony of that, Eric, we had everything except for a manual can opener at my house. So we had all these supplies, and I had forgotten a manual can opener, so I was opening with the little punch to get cans open. But now we have 2 manual can openers at the house.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. That's a great story. That's a great anecdote.
But I was not. Go ahead.
I just get first note. Next week, Scotty keeps a schedule. Next week we're doing disaster preparedness, I think. So
there you go. Well, it's a good dovetail there. Yeah.
Yes. Make sure you get a manual can opener.
Yeah, absolutely. I was not working in the media side then. I was with the National Weather Service, but not all. But let's see, 1, 2, 3, 3 of the 4 major networks in Birmingham are on Red Mountain. And Red Mountain is kind of the end of the Appalachians. And the problem with coverage was if they got off the mountain, and it's a hill really, but it's called a mountain. If they got off the mountain, they couldn't get back up to the mountain. So wow. I don't really remember much in the way of coverage because, of course, power was out. As I mentioned, we did not actually hit true blizzard conditions. I mean, we were just a hair's breadth away from them because we didn't quite hit the wind criteria, but wind gusts of 45 to 50 miles an hour were fairly common here, and the snow was also extremely heavy, and as a result, wet, and as a result, there was an awful lot of power outages that came with this event. So, in addition to the fact that everybody was immobilized and people, nobody could move unless you had four-wheel drive, and even then, it was very difficult because of the hills. In addition to that, of course, power crews are out trying to get things moving, and we don't have much in the way of snowplows in central Alabama. There's a few in the area now, and there's a few in northern Alabama, but we didn't have much in the way of any snowplowing equipment. So a lot of earth-moving graders, just regular graders that smooth the ground, they put those into operation to try to get some of the major arteries opened, and then once the major arteries got open, then of course, you could move around a little bit, but it was at least 3 days. I know on Sunday the event here started Friday afternoon, evening, and lasted until Saturday morning, and then Sunday the place was still actually paralyzed, and I did have four-wheel drive vehicles, so I actually managed to pull in 3 employees who were stuck at home, and I was able to get them in to replace 3 employees that had been there since Friday afternoon. So it was an interesting, needless to say, an interesting time with everybody pitching in, and we had the 2 shifts, the evening crew on Friday and the midnight crew for Saturday morning. They stayed over for nearly 36 hours.
Wow.
So it alternated back and forth. One of my big complaints was that one of the guys would go outside and come back and he'd put his wet socks on the radiators. And apparently that did not exactly make everybody happy in the office.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, the most unusual part of the coverage that I remember, and again, my memory is really hazy on this. I'm so impressed with the recollections of the other people here on the panel, because I'm starting to wonder if I'm getting a little dementia here. But I will tell you that, and I'm pretty sure I got the right storm here, because it was a Saturday, and I was in doing cut-ins, and then I remember we must have been broadcasting. I don't know if it was a Charlotte Hornets basketball game. This is on their first tour of duty before they came back, and they were still out at the original Charlotte Coliseum, which is not the arena that's uptown Charlotte now. This is out on Tybola Road. I know most of you aren't too familiar with the area, but anyway, we were doing some cut-ins, minute or two, maybe top and bottom of the hour, and all of a sudden somebody came running in and said they've lost power at the Charlotte Coliseum. We're in black. Can you go on and just start talking? Well, of course, that's my specialty. So, I told them about my upbringing and my problems in my childhood. But no, seriously, yeah. So that was the one thing I remember, that somebody just came running in and said, "You just have to start talking, and we'll come in and let you know when you can stop."
Was that the ACC tournament?
Maybe that was it. Maybe that was it, Joey. Thank you. Yeah, I'll bet you that was it. Now that you mention it. And so, and maybe it wasn't even in Charlotte. Maybe the ACC tournament was in Greensboro, for all I know. But I know that we were covering basketball, and wherever this was, they lost power. I'm pretty sure it was here in Charlotte, though.
Eric, it was Charlotte. It was Charlotte, okay, because we lost our feed of the tournament because they had lost power at the Coliseum. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So thanks for the assist. Yeah, because that's what I thought, and so it was kind of funny to be put in that situation, but there was plenty to talk about, so it wasn't tough. So
I remember. I remember son. So
I'm sorry, Joey.
Hey, Daniel.
The sports geek in me remembers that it was the 1993 ACC tournament, because Georgia Tech was like a low seed, and they beat North Carolina, and there's a lot of Tar Heel fans in this part of the country, so they were disappointed.
Okay.
But their misery wasn't too bad, because most of them didn't get to see it because it was out of power.
I was going to say the power here in Newton, we're actually on a city power grid, and the substation is on the other side of town from where I'm at. But I remember we had power all the way through. I'm pretty sure it was Saturday night at some point. Maybe it was Friday night. I'm sure it was Saturday night, because we didn't lose power but for a few hours. But I remember the transformer blowing. And I saw the big power flash, just like I know you guys ever seen tornado videos on TV. That's what we have. A big giant whole sky lit up blue, and you could hear it. It was you hear the wah, pow, and it went, and then we were done.
Yep. Rob, we talked about preparing. Perhaps maybe no region was better prepared than your region, since you guys dealt with hurricanes all the time, and you were kind of prepared to handle those power outages.
Yeah, I can agree with that. It's just I think, in my recollection, I'm like Eric. My memory's kind of fuzzy, but I can pick up bits and pieces. But it was almost in disbelief that this can't be happening. That the storm was deepening so quickly. Record low pressures, even lower than Hugo. The winds were hurricane force, as I mentioned. I think for us, yes, we were prepared and people knew what to expect coming off Hurricane Hugo, but still. In March, you're not thinking hurricane season, but for all practical purposes, it was a hurricane out of season for us, and we had to prepare the same way and recover the same way and endure during the storm the same way we did Hurricane Hugo. Just for us, not as prolonged, but obviously enough to kind of shake people up.
Brian, what product did the Weather Service officially issue for Alabama?
As I recall, and my memory may be a little hazy on this, but I believe we did a heavy snow warning. Because actually in southeastern U.S., anything over about 2 inches, we more or less consider heavy snow. And then, of course, when you get up to 3, you're definitely getting into what we consider to be heavy snow. I know that isn't true for a lot of the country, but as I recall, that was what we actually put out. And we did put out watches. And as I recall, beginning on Thursday, again, not that far in advance compared to what we probably would do with the same events as they unfolded today, with some of the improvements in the computer models and whatever, because we were all still pretty skeptical that we were going to get much in the way of snow, because snow in central Alabama is just, it's a rare event. It's not one of those events that you get all the time anyway. So everybody goes, bonkers whenever there's any snowflakes around here.
What's the criteria down there? 5 inches and they call the National Guard?
Just ask the Atlanta mayor from, what was it, last year?
Yes. Yeah. No, that was last year, yeah. And Birmingham had a similar bit of humanitarian crisis because that was not a well forecasted event, but it wasn't blown completely. But they were looking for snow actually south of the Birmingham area, and then what happened was we ended up in the morning we ended up with a temperature around 20 or 21 degrees, and it never climbed. And all the forecasts were looking for something around 32, 33, 34. But what happened was that everybody pours out of their offices to go home around noontime, and then we've got these extremely cold air in place, and this light precipitation begins falling. And so what happens is the cars melt the precip, and then it refreezes like almost instantaneously as cars go over the road. And we ended up with some places where people were stuck on the highway for over 24 hours, just out there in the cold. Cars ran out of gas. I mean, it was a nightmare. Atlanta got a lot more attention than we got, but we had a similar event to what Atlanta did.
First off, before we end, I want to make sure we mention this was the storm. If any of you remember when we had James Spain on the episode or the show, what was it, a couple months ago now? Yeah, in December, the famous James Spain Kevin Selly hat. So go look back at that video. Brian, I'm sure remembers it.
Oh yes, yeah. That the hat gets a lot of infamy. We pay respect to the hat all the time.
But nobody else say anything about James Spain's hair at the time. He still had a little bit of hair back then.
He still had hair back then. Yes, yeah. Now there's two kinds of jokes around the ABC 3340 Weather Center. One's related to my generation, and that is age, because I'm the oldest guy on the weather team. And then the other jokes are all about hair. So.
Now you know good and well there's a short joke thrown in there every now and then at James Spain.
Oh, absolutely.
Daniel, you had a good question, and I'll go ahead and just let you introduce that.
Yeah, back when '93 happened, you had basically the television aspect. You didn't have what you have today with social media and all that, different ways of communicating. How would a storm like what we had in '93, how would it work for y'all, and how would that be received by the public in today's way of communicating?
No, God help us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good way to sum it up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll speak coming off Hugo, and at the same time, there's 3 network affiliates. There's the radio stations. Our TV station did not have a relationship with the radio station group at the time, and that turned out to be a big mistake, because even though the all-powerful television thought we would not go off the air, we all did go off the air. And the radio stations were able to stay on the air. So we learned a hard lesson. So when '93 came, we joined forces with the radio group. So we were able to, after we lost power, get the information out. But fast forward to 2015, and all of a sudden now the ways to get information is fractured into so many smaller parts, some reliable, some not. My big concern is getting the information out and then having to refute the misinformation. That we'll have to do a lot of damage control. And if this was if 1993 Superstorm happens today, there's going to be so much misinformation that we're going to have to get rid of first before we can get the real facts out. And that's a concern, I think, for all of us, that we're going to have to do that first. And then the reliability factor, who's telling the truth? Yeah. Who's got the real scoop?
Yeah, I agree with Rob. I think there's kind of a twofold thing going on now that we didn't have in '93, and of course the social media aspect, which is what Rob was just talking about. Because let's face it, there's a lot of weather hacks out there, and sometimes people have trouble sorting out who's the real deal and who's just pimping themselves. The other aspect is the model data so much better. And so now, instead of beginning to tell people 2 or 3 days in advance, hey, you know what, this looks like this actually could happen, we could be telling people, well, the weather hacks will be the first up, you know, to be telling people 2 weeks in advance that this storm is coming, and this will be the one in 100 time where they're right, and then about a week out, we'll probably start joining in and saying, you know what, this actually looks like this could happen. And so now you've got anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks where the public is getting lathered up, you're stoking the flames, which in some respects could be good because maybe people actually will go out there and get prepared. But on the other hand, there's so much anticipation now that is building with all of these events that are coming. And I don't know if a lot of people would just react, well, there they go again, you know, the boy who cried wolf. But that's the first part of it. And then the second part of it is the actual coverage of the storm. I don't really know if we would do it a whole lot differently now than we did then. We might do more wall-to-wall coverage. But I think the local TV stations are fundamentally similar, in a similar situation than they were back then once the storm really gets going. I mean, certainly you can tweet, you can Facebook, and continue to put your message out on these different platforms. I think the thing that's also changed is maybe more on the, I don't know if I want to say the national level, but we have so many more channels now. You know, we have all these 24/7 cable news outlets now, CNN and MSNBC and Fox, and I might get myself into a little bit of trouble here, but it seems like when I watch a lot of these cable news outlets, that weather is a bit of an afterthought for them. And again, not trying to put down any of the meteorologists that work for the cable news outfits, but let's face it, they're more about news and politics than they are about weather. But there's another source where people would obviously would turn to, especially if they didn't feel like their local TV stations were doing enough coverage. And so you have so many megaphones now that are just blasting, you know, this information out. How the public would react, I don't know. Generally, if the storm lives up to its billing, it's a good outcome. But if the storm doesn't live up to its billing, you know, with all these voices now and megaphones and social media and local TV and radio and cable news, that's where we tend to get criticized the most, is if the storm actually doesn't come to fruition.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the biggest problems we have here in Alabama, and I think it's true whether you're in Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, and maybe even to some extent the Carolinas, is we're almost always dealing, now not in the Superstorm of '93, not in the storm of the century, we weren't dealing with this problem, but there's always a boundary as to where the snow ends and the rain begins. Mm-hmm. And that's always the issue for us around here. We even had that issue just a week and a half or so ago. Birmingham did not get much in the way of snow, but just a few miles north along the US 278 corridor, which runs from Hamilton on the western side of the state over to Coleman on I-65. And along that band, we had 10 inches of snow, 8 to 10 inches of snow. But the dividing line was down in the Birmingham area. So, you know, and that's always what seems to nail us. The worst here is getting people to understand that there's some uncertainty. In the case of the Superstorm or the Storm of the Century in '93, there wasn't a lot of uncertainty. We knew it was going to snow, but we just didn't know it was going to snow to that extent. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's hard to say what, with all the various social media things that we have going today. I'm pretty sure, at least in Central Alabama, that wall-to-wall coverage is something that, you know, they would do anyway. We've been doing it since then. So I'm sure that would be happening again if we had another event like that. As a matter of fact, even though this recent event did not affect Birmingham itself, most of the television stations did go to wall-to-wall coverage for some period of time when the snow was at its worst.
One more recollection I want to throw in before we sign off, because we're getting past the 9 o'clock hour now. And Rob, I'll let you handle this since you mentioned it earlier. Talk about the thunderstorms that we had down across Florida, because for many people that was the worst part of the storm, you know, with all the damage that they left behind.
Yeah, I think I was looking at some of the details, the report. I think there were 11 tornadoes down there, the loss of life in Florida. Let's see, 44 people died in Florida. which is, as we know, not terribly unusual when you have, especially in Florida, where you have outbreaks in February and March as the seasons are changing. But the impact of this was tremendous. The tornado outbreak transitioning over to the blizzard conditions, the snow, and then eventually the cold and the wind chills that were very low, setting records. So, yeah, and I think all of us have talked about looking at the satellite presentation of this was extremely impressive. And we know we don't like to use those words because it really, is more demeaning. But from our standpoint, yes, it was well formed. There was a definite squall line. The pressure is lowering. You've got so much going. The upper level jet. So Florida was an area that I think for me personally here in South Carolina was a wake up call. Because a lot of times, there you go, you see the satellite image, how it's wound up so tightly and, looks like a hurricane. And except for, wrapping all the way around, but, that's a hurricane that's spread out to tremendous, proportions.
There was a pretty good storm surge too, and
there was a lot of erosion. Yeah, there was a lot of erosion.
Yeah. I thought there was. I wasn't sure.
And Gary, I want to toss to you for the end here because you said you had some pictures to share from your time out there in Asheville.
Yeah, let's see if I can actually get them up. You let me know if you got them. Hang on a second. Okay, I'm going to screen share. There we go.
There you go. And then
all right, you guys got them?
Yep.
All right, then. That's when it first started. That was Friday afternoon when the first snowflakes started falling. That was the next morning at the LOS parking lot. And that awning collapsed 5 minutes after I took that picture.
Now, Gary, I'm seeing a bunch of thumbnails. Is that what I'm supposed to be seeing?
No, actually, you should be seeing. Is anybody else actually seeing pictures?
Yeah, it's thumbnails.
Thumbnails, yeah.
Okay, obviously, I don't know what I'm doing. Hang on a second. Let's try that. Let's try this one more time.
Gary, unclick screen share and then try it again because I imagine what you're doing is you're sharing just that window.
Okay.
So if you open up the picture first and then hit screen share, then it should allow you to select the
then we should try that. My son's not here tonight. He's my technical expert.
You know the feeling.
All right. Now let's see if this will work.
It's just like buttons in an airplane. You press one and it works.
Let's see. How about that, guys?
There we go.
There we go.
Rock and roll. All right, that's when it first started. That was the LOS parking lot.
Wow.
About 9 o'clock that morning. This awning, like I said, collapsed about 5 minutes after I took this picture. Made an ungodly sound when it collapsed. More views from the LOS parking lot. That's going out toward Macon Avenue. You can, the wind's not blowing, but the trees are already, being very heavily weighted down. This is what happens to your Blazer when you're somebody who's joyriding in a minivan during a blizzard. That's my house. That's the snow drifts that were up. I mean, it just, like I said, when I got home, I was just floored that we had that much snow.
Are we sure this ain't Boston, Gary?
I know, man. It looks like it. That's
that wind vane.
I mean, it just. Hey, there you go. There's the wind vane. There you go. My wife actually let me drill holes in the roof to put that up. Yeah, we stopped measuring the snow with a ruler. We started using a yardstick at some point. But this one, you can see the snow drift up to the house. I mean, that rail is 4 feet above the ground, so 4 foot drift up to the house. That was my Blazer the next morning.
Goodness.
That was when I was making my way to the Blazer to actually dig it out. Again,
Gary, where did you actually keep your Ferrari at the time?
No, that was in the garage. That was in the garage. Yes.
Okay. Just making sure.
Yeah. But like you guys, like Daniel said, I mean, this looks like Boston this past winter. I mean,
Yeah.
my Camaro, by the way, Eric, was in that garage at that time.
There you go. Okay, that's funny.
That's Boston in one storm.
Yeah. But this is after 3 hours of work digging that Blazer out on that Sunday.
Mm.
That's our Sheltie who wondered, where the hell did all this come from?
Yeah.
Now, this is very interesting because, you know, Mother Nature the animals normally get a good sense of what's going on. I had never seen bluebirds eat sunflower seeds until this storm. They were so caught off guard they had no food. They were actually out there at our bird feeders eating sunflower seeds off the ground.
Yeah, I remember my grandma. She was the type that she couldn't let an animal or a human starve. And I remember in this snowstorm, she had obviously went to the store and got plenty of bread and was throwing it out for the birds. And I'm like, you know, we might need this eventually.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
But you know, like, and here's where desperate. Hang on, let me back up one. This is desperate times. No power, but we had gas. So I lifted the grates out of the grill and put pots inside on those grates to heat up. You know,
So Pizza Hut wasn't delivering?
pizza. Speaking of that, we'll get to. There's Pizza Hut right there.
Wow.
All right.
And there's one of the Humvees that they had to dig out. But this was 2 days after the storm.
Wow.
That's my wife's Revco, and she was in that store when it collapsed.
Oh my gosh.
Gary, you brought up a good thing, and that's something we had touched on. This wasn't a dry, powdery snow, man. This was paste that fell on us. And you had a lot of roof collapses. I remember seeing on some of the national broadcast places in Tennessee and Georgia and the Carolinas. That was heavy stuff, man. It just collapsing everything.
Well, if I remember, I think there were like hundreds just in the North Carolina mountains that had roof collapses.
Oh yeah. Well, the funny thing about this store collapse is the way the front of the roof was. The snow had actually blown against the front where the Revco sign was at. So a lot of the weight had gotten distributed in the front of that roof. And when this building was constructed, there was an I-beam that intersected another I-beam in a T, and they were never welded together. And what ended up happening is that I-beam actually rolled forward because of the weight of the snow. It actually twisted that metal I-beam, and the store actually started collapsing in slow motion. And then all of a sudden, when the beam gave way, the whole thing came down. And the front of that store is where the pharmacy was at. And my wife had a feeling, she had actually seen that the glass was breaking out of the front of the store. She knew this was about to happen, and she went forward out of the pharmacy about the time the front of the store came down. And luckily, no one got killed, no one got injured. But you know, like I said, even days after the storm, and Rob and Eric and Brian will attest to this. You know, people start letting their guards down when the storm is ended. You know, okay, the danger's over with, but there's still real danger out there after a massive event like this that can linger for days, if not even a week.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And a shameless plug, if anyone wants to see even more pictures, I've actually got them on my Facebook page, and I'm actually going to be reposting these tomorrow. The anniversary, and it's Throwback Thursday on Facebook.
All right.
Throwback to the March Superstorm.
That's good stuff.
All right then. How do I get out of this and get us back into just hit stop?
Click the screen share button again or hit stop.
Okay then.
One question I have to add, what was the public's perception of this? I mean, I know, Eric, I watch you all the time with news coverage and snowstorms. What was it like for the news department? I mean, were they just out days on days covering stories? I mean, what was the public's perception of all of this? I don't remember what Ricky said. I don't know if he was alive. I was only 2, so I don't remember any of this. But
No.
what was the perception of what was taking place?
I wish you were a little older, Scotty, because I need somebody to tell me how we did on our forecast. Anyway, no, I mean, you know, it's funny. I don't know. I knew you were having a few problems early, Scotty, so I don't know if you heard some of my opening remarks. But it was crazy because, I mean, certainly I know that we had well advertised this storm, at least in the short term. but yet it was crazy because the gradient of the snowfall from Charlotte to the northwest was just unbelievable. We only had a couple of inches officially at the airport, and as I said earlier, by the time I got up to my house 8 miles northwest of Charlotte, I was in 8, 10, 12 inches of snow up there. But so what was the public's perception? I think around Charlotte it wasn't all that crazy because we just barely missed the worst of it. But all I can remember, I really can't speak for the public. I can just speak for what my perceptions were of watching the subsequent stories that were ongoing about the rescues that were going on up in the mountains and the roof collapses up there and the people who were being lifted out. And things like that. I was just flabbergasted at some of the snow totals I was hearing that were coming back from like Mount Pisgah or was it Mount LeConte? Anyway, it was like 50, 60-inch snowfall totals. And again, not counting drifts. So I can't really recall. I think everybody else probably was reacting just like I was. I mean, we're all just kind of spectators at that point, with our jaws dropped, looking up at the mountains, going, "What on earth happened up there?" And just basically flipping on the news every day, getting the latest. And that's about all I can recall at this point.
Gary, what was it like in Asheville?
Well, I mean, Scotty, the biggest thing was that we did have a foot of snow in the forecast, but it had been a good 5 years, 6 years since we had that much snow. And there's a lot of people, I mean, even today when you forecast a foot of snow, people aren't going to believe you. And there were people who weren't prepared. Like Eric said, there were a good amount of rescues that were taking place. I'll never forget Saturday morning, there were people calling the TV station saying, "I don't have baby formula, I don't have medicine, I don't have diapers, I don't have food." Like we could do something about it. But it goes back to what Eric was talking about too, about having one of those survival kits. It's kind of a manual can opener. It's one of those things that you probably won't need it, but about once every 7, 8, 9, 10 years. But by God, when it happens, it's good to have. But again, meteorologists in general weren't anticipating. I mean, when you're looking at a record-breaking event, and this kind of falls back to the April 2011 tornadoes too. We knew it was going to be bad, but you don't know how bad it is going to be until it really gets to rolling and things start shaking out. And, it's hard to convey that to the public when you're supposed to be the person on TV saying, "Hey, this is what's going to happen." But it doesn't instill their confidence when you get on and go, "We think this is going to happen, but it could be 10 times worse than that." So you don't want to go do that. But that's the thing. It's almost you don't want to go for the worst case scenario, because if you miss it, you're going to look like a total boob. And then the next time you're forecasting one and get it right, no one's going to believe you. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best.
That's it.
We have a show on that outbreak too coming up next month. I was going to say, isn't Asheville's average snowfall is only a little over a foot, right?
Yeah, like 10 to 12 inches a year. Yeah.
Right.
And Brian, I imagine that in Birmingham, I mean, like you said, it doesn't snow much down there, but then you get this crazy amount of snow. I mean, I know it was probably a little crazy down there as well.
Oh yes, it was. And I think I mentioned early on, one of my recollections was how radio stations were trying to put people together with people who had resources, because there were people who needed some medical attention and baby formula and things like that. People were prepared, but they weren't prepared for the magnitude of the event that we ended up with. They were prepared for some snow, but not for 3 to 5 day power outages, and some places in the central Alabama area were without power for over a week. So they weren't prepared for that, and getting people moved around. It was really a wonderfully warm-hearted thing to see, heartwarming to see people coming out with four-wheel drive vehicles and doing what they could to put people with resources. And I know a bunch of radio stations here in the Birmingham area, we're doing that. People would call in. Believe it or not, phone lines managed to stay up despite the fact that we have so many power outages. But phone lines stayed up, and they were calling in and people telling about problems. And I worked with the local police department in the little community I live, and actually got a nurse to a patient who needed some insulin, and so that was always good to see the community come together in this disaster.
Yeah, I'm sure we're getting ready to wrap up. My only recollection, like I said, I was 2 years old, and we're actually visiting family in Nashville, Tennessee, and I know this all just from my parents telling me. They talked to in Knoxville, they talked to the Tennessee State Patrol, and they said, is Interstate 40 open from Knoxville into North Carolina? And they was like, go for it. And we got to the North Carolina line, and we had to spend the night on Interstate, and much of the rest of the next day as well on Interstate. So it's just it's something you don't really expect to happen here in the Southeast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's desolate land over in that area too. There's not much.
Yeah. It wasn't fun, that's for sure.
One thing before we wrap up, Daniel, share the picture you showed me of the Weather Channel's local on the 8s for Hickory. Okay. And as anybody's listening on the podcast, we'll make sure we post those pictures, and we'll share Gary's page on the Carolina Weather Group Facebook page. You guys can find it.
Okay. Give me just a minute to find that. You guys can talk about something. I'll pull it up on my screen share.
Just talk amongst ourselves.
Sure. Whatever you want to do.
Eric's at Chick-fil-A there, Rob.
Eric, just talk. That's what you do, man. Just talk until we tell you to stop.
I'm trying to get some money from Chick-fil-A right now.
Yeah. Good luck.
Hey, we'll take that sponsorship.
Coca-Cola?
I've got candy from a candy factory in Nashville, North Carolina.
Brian, we need JB on here to ask him what he had for lunch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, fellas, can you see that?
Oh, let me pull you up.
Gotcha.
Yeah, there you go.
Wow.
Snow and thunder.
The ultimate weenie moment.
Yep.
2 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon, snow and thunder in 32. It don't get any better than that, folks.
Wow. I will say that storm is the only time I've ever experienced thunder snow before. And I didn't act like Cantori when I saw it. I was like, what is that? Well, what is that mess?
Just for the record, I act like Cantori whenever it happens.
Yeah.
All right.
Not exactly the best example in the world. Don't we tell people to get inside when we encounter lightning?
Yeah.
Hey, I remember, and it was funny. It was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was watching ACC tournament. Matter of fact, fell asleep. The cable had already went out, so I turned the TV off. Wake up in the middle of the night. And then I see this blue flash, and I'm thinking, okay, transformer. So I'm immediately walking outside to see if everything's pitch dark. It's not. And about 10, 15 seconds later, there's a rumble of thunder, and that was enough for me, man. I was on cloud 9.
I always have the rule that I tell everybody, don't do as I do as I say, okay?
Yeah, exactly.
Because I'm the first one out. I'm the first one out the door when something like this happens. All right, Ricky, let's let everybody go home.
A little past 9 o'clock, but I kind of figured we were going to be there tonight with a big topic like this. So, thank you everyone for coming on tonight. Brian, Eric, Gary, Rob. I think it's been a really interesting night. Thinking back to all the memories, and a lot of memories I had never heard before since I wasn't even alive during the storm. But
awesome.
You have to rub that in.
That out.
Yeah.
you mentioned the past kind of thing earlier, so.
Yeah. Any final words from the future?
So. Scotty, do you want to end everything? Tell everyone a couple of things we got coming up next week?
Yeah, we can do that. Next week we have Cheryl Nelson on an emergency disaster preparedness show. She'll be on there talking about the kits that Eric and Gary have alluded to tonight. So we hope you'll join us for that. After that, we kind of have an open week at the end of March, and then April we start Severe Weather Month. We're going to have several guests on, and actually I want to talk to Gary after the show and see. He mentioned the outbreak out east, so I want to see maybe if he can come on and talk a little bit about that. But we have a great month lined up for April. A lot of awesome guests from the Storm Prediction Center, and looking forward to that. So with that, Ricky has some big news. If you've been following us on our Facebook page, I know he's really excited, and we're all excited for him. So Ricky, do you want to announce it, or?
Well, I have two big news. Charlotte Weatherfest is only a week away, so that's exciting.
That's right.
We'll
What's your long-term?
Yeah.
your long-term future.
Yeah, last week I accepted a job up at WCYB, which is the NBC and Fox affiliate in Bristol, Virginia / Tennessee. It sits right in the line. Our station is literally a football into Virginia.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Ricky. All right.
Thank you.
Welcome to the family.
Fantastic.
So I'll be the weekend meteorologist up there, and my first weekend on air is Saturday. So everything's going quickly. So I'll be doing part-time until I graduate in May, and then full-time up there right about the middle part of May. So.
Well, I can already tell, Ricky, you've got a good cadence. You're gonna do great.
Thank you, Eric.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So, and then, as I alluded to, the other part is, as we've been throwing out for, what, months now, Charlotte Weatherfest has quickly snuck up on us. It's only a week away. It's going to be next Saturday, the 21st of March, at UNC Charlotte. You can park for free in East Decks 1 and 2. We've got handicap parking available in Lot 16A. Lots of kids' activities, lots of meteorologists from the area coming out. Got the Weather Service coming out. I've got Hurricane Track. The city of Charlotte's going to bring out their emergency vehicles and a swiftwater rescue boat. So weather balloon launch at 4 o'clock and presentations from our professors and our students rolling throughout the day. So come on out. It's free, and we hope to see you out there.
Yeah, looking forward to that event. I know you put a lot of hard work into it, so we're looking forward to getting out there and seeing it.
Yeah.
All right.
Give everybody a chance to plug their social media there, Scotty, because I know we're going to want to look for Gary's and see some of those pictures, especially listen to the podcast. So.
Yes, guys, we'll start with Rob, and we'll work around. If you guys want to promote social media, how our audience can get in contact with you, that would be great.
What's social media? Oh, no. Facebook, Rob Storm Team 2, Rob Fowler Storm Team 2. My Twitter is at Rob Storm Team 2. So that's kind of the primary way that we communicate personally. And then, of course, the station, we're WCBD News 2, and that's our Facebook page.
How about MySpace, Rob?
MySpace, that's someone for the other,
That's when Rob was still in the rock band.
I think I do still have a MySpace page. It's just not been active for a long time.
All right, Mr. Stephenson, Gary.
Yeah, Chief Meteorologist Gary Stephenson on Facebook. We've also got the Weather on the One's Facebook page, and Gary.Stephenson_WX is the Twitter, and I just barely can use Facebook, so I never even work with MySpace.
All right, Eric Thomas.
Hey, yeah, I was trying to remember what my handle was. It's Eric Thomas WBTV. That's the Facebook name, and the Twitter is at Eric Thomas WBTV. So I try to be consistent there. And I'll tell you something else we just started recently on WBTV.com. We're kind of having fun with it. We're doing weather blogs now. So if you just go to WBTV.com, go to the weather section, check out the blogs as we just muse about things, and hopefully maybe give you some extra insight onto some of the other things that are on our minds. So there you go.
And I want to give a special shout out to Eric. He and I were emailing and texting back and forth late last night and early today to kind of arrange this. So Eric, thank you so much for coming on at the last minute.
Well, thank you for your patience with me, Scotty, because I know I don't mean to be non-committal. I knew I was going on vacation and I wasn't sure what the wife had planned. So
that's okay. I'm glad you're able to join us. So
that's important.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
And Mr. Brian Peters, also thank you. I know we were emailing back and forth this morning and everything. So thank you for coming on, and I'll let you promote your social media.
Sure. I appreciate the opportunity to reminisce about a big event in our past there. You can find me on Twitter at HelenaWX, and also on Facebook the same way. And if you want to get in touch with me through our television station, it's Brian P. at abc3340.com.
And one last thing.
And we can see Brian every Monday night on Weather Brains.
I was going to say, you have a little show that you do on Mondays.
Yeah, Weather Brains. Yeah, weatherbrains.com if you want to take a look there. And we have a good time just like you guys do.
And one last throw-in I'll put in for Brian as well. The Alabama WX.com website has a lot of good blog posts from over the years about the blizzard of '93. If you're interested in Alabama specifically.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
All right, guys. Well, it's approaching 9:30. We're going to wrap up again. Rob, Gary, Eric, and Brian, thank you so much for coming on tonight. And I hope everyone kind of had reminiscent memories, good or bad, of the blizzard of '93. And personally, I'm ready to see another, maybe not to this magnitude, but I'm ready to see a good, decent snow. I haven't seen one of those in a long time. So
Scotty missed the only decent one this year.
I know. I missed the only decent one this year. I was in Oklahoma, so go figure. But yeah, so.
One other thing, Scott, am I the only one working on TV tonight? Everybody else is on vacation.
You are. Everybody's off this week.
Sweeps is over.
So everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, guys. If you don't mind, stick around for just a second. I want to ask you all something after the show. But you're watching Carolina's Weather Group again. Next week, we're going to have emergency preparedness with Cheryl Nelson. She's going to tell you what you need for your emergency preparedness kits going into April, where we'll start to see the severe weather season pick up. So for everyone, we thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week. Have a good week.
Bye.